Daniel.
Yes.
I listened to this week's episode, which is 2 weeks ago episode. That's 2 Inside Baseball.
Yeah, it's something like that.
Anyways, and there was 3 pre-shows.
Mm-hmm.
And in the chapter markers, there was only 1 pre-show. And I know that maybe I'm nitpicking as one who's not editing the podcast, but I feel like there should have been a pre-show, a pre-pre-show, and a pre-pre-pre-show chapter marker.
That's a lot of chapter markers, and they'd be really close together because some of those pre-shows were pretty short.
But how are people going to know if that they're in the triple pre-show and they could maybe they only want to listen to the regular?
Are you thinking that people are talking to our listeners are talking to each other and they're like, you can skip the first pre-show and the third pre-show, but you've got to make sure you catch the second pre-show.
Look, it's like, there's 3 rounds of qualifying in an F1 race, F1, right? Right before the big race, there's Q1, Q2, Q3. And maybe you don't care about Q1 or Q2, but you really want to watch Q3 because that's whenever like the top 10 positions are set. Is very similar to our pre-show. Like maybe you just don't care about the pre-show, but for the pre-show or the pre-show, you really want to watch those. Yeah. And by watch, I mean listen, because this is an audio format.
I mean, if they want to sit there and watch their phone while it plays, they're welcome.
But what if they skip forward 30 seconds? They won't even know if they've crossed into the pre-show.
That's true.
Because they didn't listen.
That's true. Maybe they should just listen to the whole show. I mean, it's all good, right?
They're all good shows, Brent.
Something like that. Welcome back to the Camera Gear Podcast. I'm Daniel.
And I'm Lucas.
And we're here today to talk about the gear, software, and techniques we use to shoot photos and video.
Summer's here, Daniel.
It is in full swing.
It is in full swing. And that means 2 things.
What does it mean?
I have to put one more thing in the notes here so I don't forget about it.
Fine.
Shirtless summer.
Yeah, which we've avoided so far, as we mentioned a few weeks ago.
Nope, but here we go. Just taking my shirt off now.
No,
we're doing
AC's
it.
On. You don't need, the AC's on.
Well, if I get cold, that's my own fault. Okay, so shirtless summer. Here we go. Rock and roll. The second one, if I recall, and my memory is perfect, a certain camera company said that they were going to release Reel Ace for the X Processor 5 cameras in the spring, and it is now summer, and my shirt is off, and there is no Reel Ace, and I'm very upset.
Yeah, I mean,
I am entitled.
I'm upset too, partially because your shirt's off and partially because I want that update. I want to know where my red record border is on that camera.
Supposedly, there's been a rumor that says still in June, and there's another rumor that says August.
Well, still in June is really running out of time, and August is, that's not spring.
I think they said during the XT50 event that it was going to be August, which was like an update on their timeline.
I wish they could, hire a couple more people to work on the software. It's ridiculous that it takes so long.
To me, August feels like never.
It does. It seems, pretty far out.
I want that Reel Ace.
I really care more about the record border thing because I have that on the XT5 and it's so nice. You can see at a glance you're recording. It's so much better.
Be nice to have waveforms. Was that coming? I can't even remember.
Yeah, I don't think so, but maybe it was. The struggles of using an XH2S for video.
Yeah, I guess so. Oh, well.
Yeah.
So, okay. Last week, I don't remember, Daniel. All the weeks are running together, and the context of like this podcast and release dates of cameras is going to be totally wild.
We talk about them when we talk about them, right?
All good. Point is, on a Monday, which I think was last Monday, Z6 Mark III was announced.
Yep.
And I went and cut down my dad's maple tree that was half dead.
This is very related to the Z6 Mark III coming out
on Saturday, and I was really looking forward to not cutting down the tree because it was just okay.
A little warm outside for that.
Yeah, it's fine. But standing on a ladder with a chainsaw, like one-handed, always a little sketchy. Anyways, going out there, I was like, oh man, I'm going to get to ask my dad, what do you think about that Z6 Mark III? Did you watch all those YouTube videos? Did you read the blogs? I don't know where he gets his information. So
probably not Gerald Undone videos.
Oh,
if I had to guess.
Certainly not. He's never been undone. Anyway. And so he like recanted this whole story to me. and he's already pre-ordered a Z6 Mark III.
That's he's on the ball.
He was, man, like, it was a whole thing.
So did you ask him, how does he know when these cameras are released? Because that's the question I have.
He's got his pulse on it. He just knows. Like, he's been checking the rumor sites. I don't know. He just knows. Like, he somehow.
I mean, do you think he has a contact at the camera store that just calls him when a new Nikon comes out?
Look, he has a Z6 Mark I.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever he came back from his trip, he couldn't push the SD card all the way in. Like, it wouldn't click in.
Oh, weird.
And so he had, like, he's like, it's broken.
Yeah.
And so he went to the camera store down here where we are and was like, fix it. And they said, well, we can't fix it. We have to send it to Nikon, and it's going to cost you $40 for us to send it to Nikon. And it's going to cost them probably $300 to fix it. And he's like, that's exhausting. Like, you can't, like, come on, guys. And so he's looking at this thing. Nikon's like, hey, if you send us that camera, we'll give you up to like $600 in trade-in towards the Z6 Mark III. And I was like, I would give you that much money for the Z6 Mark I. Why are you just sending it to Nikon? You didn't even talk to me. You didn't even talk to me whenever you came down here to the camera store, and we were like just down the road from me.
Of course.
Hey, Lucas, I'm in your neck of the woods. I'm not going to come talk to you or anything. I'm just at the camera store where you love to go. Bye. And then you can get one of those.
You really, at some point, need to experience your dad at the camera store.
The number of
and that would be a good podcast content.
I don't understand it. I think he knows I have a podcast. I've tried to bring it up, but he just shuts me down. So yeah. I don't think he wants to know about the podcast. It's embarrassing. Anyways, I feel like he knows I like camera. You go to the camera store. Hey, I'm going to the camera store. Do you want to go to the camera store? I'm sure you don't have any reason to go, but maybe you want to go to the camera store. Yes, I would like to go. I would like to drop what I'm doing and meet you at the camera store. Sounds like a nice time. Little father-son camera store time. Nope.
He doesn't want you, he doesn't want you getting in the way of this experience for him.
Maybe I interfere.
You just bring him down.
Maybe I have too many opinions.
Yeah. He's, he has to go commune with the Nikon people at the camera store, and you're not one of them. You're not a Nikon person.
I can't. Oh.
You tried to be. You said you would have bought his camera for $600.
See?
But he didn't want to induct you into the club.
That's what it is. He doesn't want me to have a Nikon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're not worthy yet.
Well, I have to embrace the super zoom.
Yes. If you buy a 13 to 200, that's when you can become a Nikon bro.
Maybe this is an indictment of me more than anything.
It kind of seems that way.
Anyway.
So he pre-ordered the camera.
So like he was on the fence of, well, do I send this thing in or do I not? Because they're not going to give me any money for it because it's broken.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that like it's not this SD card. It's he was calling like a QXC card or something, but it's
the slot can do CF Express Type B. Well, I don't know on the Z6.
CF Express and
the other one's XQD.
XQD, yeah. So it's an XQD card.
Okay.
And apparently those are weird on the end and they can break. And essentially what had happened is part of it had chipped off and landed in the port, and that's why he couldn't push it down. And so like he blew it out with compressed air and it was totally fine.
Oh, okay.
But he said, I think it's fixed. But before it's not fixed anymore, I'm sending this puppy to Nikon.
I understand that feeling.
Yep.
I've been there before.
It's working right now. Put it in the box. Get it out of here.
Yep. I wouldn't do that with a private sale, but selling it back to the company, sure.
Sure. Yeah. Because we'll fix it, resell it, whatever. So, I just don't understand. We haven't even talked about the camera yet, and he pre-ordered it.
Yeah.
I would think that he would have waited for us to talk about it so he could really.
Yep.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
He's just been waiting, chomping at the bit.
Well, because he skipped the Mark II.
Yep.
But I mean, I guess it's been a while since he bought that Mark
2017, I think.
That's a pretty good upgrade cycle.
It's a pretty good upgrade. Because spoiler alert, Daniel, we're talking about the Z6 Mark III today.
No, you don't say.
Nikon cast.
I remember a couple weeks ago we had mentioned it as a likely upcoming camera, and then it was announced.
Ta-da! Yeah. And then we talked for a whole episode about film cameras.
Yes. As we do.
I don't have any updates on the film cameras for you.
Yeah, I bet you still haven't developed that roll of film.
I have not. I've been so busy.
Yeah.
And I'm debating on whether or not to take it to the camera store and having them do it.
That would be admitting defeat.
Well, now
is it because of the time, or is it because you're afraid you'll mess it up?
It's the time. Like, I just don't know when I'm going to get to it.
Yeah.
Like, realistically, it's going to be another week before I get to it.
Mm-hmm.
I could just
have it.
I could just swing by and drop. But like, I kind of want to scan it myself to save that $10.
But then that takes half the time, right? So
It's just never going to happen. They're going to just go bad sitting on my
this definitely
shelf.
seems like the problem with film is that, yeah, I mean, the cost is one aspect, but the other problem is if you want to develop it yourself, it's a significant time investment.
Well, remember whenever we talked about it, and I was like, it would take as much time to drive to the camera store to drop all the stuff as it would to develop my
I do
film.
remember that. So why is it? What's different?
Nothing's different.
Yeah,
I just haven't had time to drive to the camera store either.
I feel like it's because driving to the camera store is generally a mental break, whereas developing film is not a mental break. I think that's the difference.
Yeah, you don't want to check out when you're developing film.
Yeah, definitely not.
Man, you could like count wrong. Game over.
Like, it's the difference between like, this is something where I'm going to have to really focus for an hour versus I can like just drive in my car and listen to a podcast.
That's because your car drives itself.
That's true. Yours doesn't. Yours is the opposite of that. You have to like manually shift gears and
it's the worst, isn't it?
It's like a full-time job. Yeah. Anyway, should we talk about the Z6 Mark III?
Yes. So going into this episode, I wanted to go remind myself all of the gory details of stacked sensors so we could talk about it.
Well, I mean, we kind of understand stacked sensors, but like this one's something different, right?
Yes. And so I was trying to get into really get into the weeds on it, and I got like ankle deep. And so I'm not fully prepared to talk about all the stacked goodness and like what and why, even though I know everybody really wants to just spend some time.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what we do here, but if you're not ready, then we'll have to come back to
I think we're just going to loop back on it because I do want to know more about what they're doing. So like the big feature on this for the Z6 III is the new sensor. And it's this 24.5 megapixel, quote unquote, partially stacked sensor.
Yeah, which is weird, right? Like, how can you partially stack a sensor? Is it like they're like offset? Because that'd be weird. I don't think that would work.
It's not that the sensor is stacked on top of each other. It's just, I think like the way that they market the sensors, like they pick that one word that sticks, but like the word doesn't mean the same thing to people as it means to like the sensor construction, like backside illuminated.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you're like lighting up the backside, and it's like, no, we just put the chip stuff on the other side, so it's not in the way. I don't know, whatever. So like for a stack sensor, I mean, we've talked about how like CMOS sensors read sequentially, right? You like close the mechanical shutter, and then it reads each row like one after the other.
Yeah, we talked about rolling shutter, and yeah.
And I think that what a stack sensor does is it introduces an extra layer of like an extra memory component layer, so that you can locally store that information off and then read it after time, so that you're pulling information off of the sensor faster by having like an extra layer of data removal.
It's faster, but it's not a global sensor. Like you still do get rolling shutter on a stacked sensor.
Correct. Yeah, you're not doing it all at once. It's just a way to architect the chip with additional memory modules, I believe. Don't quote me on it. That allows you to read off the sensor faster.
Yeah.
And so for this one, instead of doing that for like every line of the sensor, they've made like the top and the bottom of it stacked, is what it sounded like. Though that does seem odd because for the video modes on this camera, there is no open gate recording.
Yeah.
So to me, it seems like you would want to stack the middle part.
I don't know.
But so I don't necessarily know how they configured it, but the point is they don't have the extensiveness of the additional like readout speed of something like a Z8 or a Z9 or an A1 or an XH2S.
Yeah, yeah. But they're getting better performance than you get with a sensor that's not at all stacked.
Right, and the advertised feature here is that look, it's the best compromise where you're getting the cost savings of not going all the way, but you are getting the speed of it. And the difference here is maybe something like, the R6 Mark II is actually pretty fast, but you have like an A7 IV with a 30 megapixel sensor, some more megapixels, so not an exact comparison, is going to have a rolling shutter in the 15 to 20 second range. Whereas like an R6 Mark II, lower megapixels, faster sensor technology in that one, maybe like the 14, 15 second range. This is going to be down in the 9 to 10 second.
Yeah,
and
that's
then
pretty good.
If you're looking at your stack systems, those are like sub 6 seconds.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like
It basically splits the difference.
It's notably slower than something like an XH2S, but it is quite a bit faster than the other stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that's pretty cool. It enables a lot of neat stuff here. It comes at the cost of dynamic range, at least in video.
At least on this camera. I mean, I don't know if every stack sensor is that way, but yeah, this sensor seems like it's that way.
Yeah, not every stack sensor is that way. For instance, the Fujifilm uses that 14-bit readout mode and like leverages the stack sensor to pull that extra data off.
Yeah.
Excuse me. To pull that extra data off. And so like you get additional dynamic range just by virtue of pulling 14-bit instead of 12-bit. Anyway, so this one specifically in video, less dynamic range. Because this is still like pre-production, there's no like final versions actually out for sale. It was announced and it went into reviewers' hands and that was it. We don't have any real information on how the raw files perform. And so we can't say like what's the dynamic range of the raw files. This is still doing, 14-bit raw for full frame. So I would expect that if you're looking at a photo file that's 14-bit raw, you're going to get 14 stops of range in there.
I would be less worried about the photo side of it and more about the video side.
Right.
Based on the testing we saw.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. And looking at the video coming out of this and the photos coming out of these and all the reviews, I mean, everything looks super good. The colors look great. I don't necessarily think it's going to be an issue, but we'll probably talk a little bit more about the dynamic range as we dive into this.
Yeah, sounds good.
Unless you want to just talk about it right now.
I mean, we could just talk about it right now since we're kind of already talking about it.
Yeah, so I think that for video, what we're seeing is, did you watch the Gerald and M video?
I did.
I don't know if Cine D has done their like xylophone test. I know that's not what it's called.
It's kind of what it looks like.
Lol. But Gerald did his. And so do you want to run through what he found?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I remember everything offhand, but I definitely noticed that it just seemed like the dynamic range wasn't as good as mostly what we've seen on these cameras. On modern cameras now. I mean, it seemed like, you always look at those numbers like, what can you get with a reasonable level of noise? And then, sometimes he'll say, well, if you do a bunch of noise reduction, you get more performance. But I mean, out of camera with noise reduction turned off, it seemed like he was getting like under 12 stops. So what was it, like 11.4 that he was getting? And then with some noise reduction, you're getting like 12 and a half. But I mean, that's doing noise reduction, in software like Resolved where you're having to process it and stuff. And I mean, 12 stops is fine, but it's definitely not class leading. And at this point, I would say it's like, that's all right, but it doesn't impress me.
Yeah. So he was running those tests at ISO 800, which I think is the log ISO. I don't think he ran those in RAW.
I don't think so either.
This camera can shoot RAW internal. What? Anyways. And yeah, like in standard modes, he was getting like 11.4 stops total. And then it was like less than 10 for like a signal noise ratio of 2.
Yeah.
Which is not really that good.
No.
But it was like if he worked the files or he shot in RAW or he did some noise reduction, he could get a total range of like 14 and then make it work out to 12 roughly, which is pretty on par with most mirrorless cameras right now. If you can get to 12, you're good.
But it's just like you're having to put in extra work to get to that point.
Right. Yeah, you have to work for the 12 stops, which was maybe kind of maybe annoying for people who want a workflow straight out of camera.
Yeah.
So that may be good, maybe bad for some people. I know that a lot of the teens like CCD sensor cameras because they have lower dynamic range, and so as a result, they just look more contrasty. And so maybe if you don't actually need to shoot really disparate? Is that a word?
I don't think that's a word.
Very like the highlight and shadows being extremely different. If you're not in that sort of situation, maybe you are happy with lower dynamic range because it makes your footage look more contrasty.
Just expose the shot properly and there's no problem.
Yeah, just expose the shot properly.
Yeah,
not an issue. Now, these tests were at 800 ISO. I know that the Z8 and the Z9 had a feature where you could shoot at like 80 ISO in log.
Oh, weird.
Do you remember that like low?
It sounds kind of familiar now.
Yeah. I don't remember seeing in the spec sheet for the Z6 Mark III, but I would be surprised that this also didn't have that feature. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was kind of a cool feature whenever they came out with it for the Z8,
Yeah.
having that lower ISO log
I mean,
option.
we've had a couple of situations now where we've avoided shooting in log because we didn't have appropriate ND to shoot at the ISOs that are required. So
Yeah.
that's a pretty cool feature.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. So not great, but I would say that this is maybe the only downside for this camera. Maybe there's other ones, but this is probably the major one.
I would say it's the biggest thing that should give you pause if you want to shoot video is like, it's just, the dynamic range is just not as good as most other cameras.
I always want as much dynamic range as possible, though generally speaking, I can work with 10 to 12 stops and it's not the end of the world. Dropping below 12 is kind of a bummer. Dropping below 11 is kind of a bummer. But with this one, like if you're in that situation, like shooting in RAW and you'll figure it out and make it work. I would take that compromise for all of the other features, especially if I was using this as an actual like hybrid camera, which is who they're pitching this for as here's a hybrid photo video for the everyday person. And if you're shooting 50% photo, then I wouldn't let the dynamic range get in your way.
It is a shame that they don't have we just talked about the GH7 and that has the dynamic range boost where they use the fast read out of the sensor to increase their dynamic range. And it's a shame you don't have something like that here to where you could make that choice.
It seems like they could totally do it because we were talking about rolling shutter and sensor speed. And so like if you're shooting video with this thing, you can shoot in most modes, which are like, so it's a 24.5 megapixel sensor. And so that's around 6K. And like different modes have different resolutions. Some are like 5.4K, some are 6K. But basically any mode, full sensor, up to 60p.
Yeah.
And that was just great. And like in shooting, like you're gonna shoot, say you 4K 60. That's oversampled from 6K. 4K oversampled from 6K in 60p, full width of the sensor, and the rolling shutter on that is like 9 milliseconds.
Yeah. So it's like give a mode that decreases, that increases that rolling shutter, but gives you better dynamic range.
Yeah, like if you doubled those shots somehow and kept a major rolling shutter 20 instead of 10, it would still be faster than an A7 IV, and maybe you get more dynamic range.
Yeah, I don't know. And maybe that's something they'll look into at some point because it'd be interesting.
Or maybe that's not how that works.
Yeah, it could be.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean on the XH2S, you only get the 14-bit readout when you shoot at 30 frames per second.
Right.
And so that's the other way to do it is like, if you're normally able to shoot in 60p, say if you shoot in 30p, you can use higher dynamic range. Like that gives you the time to get those extra frames.
Right.
I don't know. It'd be cool. I can understand. I mean, it sounds complicated, so I can understand why they haven't done it, but
it would be great to see something like that. It would be really cool to see something like that in this Nikon. There's just the in-camera processing stuff doesn't seem to be a huge priority for them. For instance, this camera has a few. So like you could do like focus stacking in the other cameras, and this one has features like focus stacking, but it also has features like multi-shot high-res mode.
Yeah, a lot of cameras have that now where like it uses IBIS or whatever, and you can kind of like shift the sensor around and get some mega high pixel count picture.
But this one doesn't have, it's not as like complete of a feature as something out of like Olympus. You have to put it on tripod. You can't hand hold it. If there's a lot of movement in the shot, it's going to do a pretty poor job of capturing or not capturing. But of all of those things, it doesn't do it in camera. It just gives you somewhere between like, I think I wrote it down here. It's like 14 to, I don't know, 32, 4 to 32 photos, depending on what you pick. And then you have to take those 32 photos, stick it into NX Studio, and have it build the 90 megapixel image.
Yeah, that's a pretty annoying workflow.
It is. But to me, it seems like that would just end up being the same thing as this, high dynamic range thing that we're talking about. It's like they would have to build that feature into the camera, and they're not even building the 96 megapixel tripod image boost thing into the camera.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
So I don't know if maybe that's not Nikon's jam.
Yeah, could be.
Okay. So 24.5 megapixel, partially stacked. It goes up to 64,000 ISO in its non-extended mode. And I would expect that it will extend out to like at least 128,000.
Yeah. Yeah, probably so.
I didn't see if it extends out to 256,000, so not sure if this goes out to the same sensitivity as something like an A7 IV.
Yeah. Yeah.
But hopefully you're not shooting at ISO
Yeah.
256,000.
I can't imagine many use cases for that. Does it have dual native ISO?
It seems like maybe, but it's not advertised.
Oh, okay. Weird.
Yeah, so not, let's just say like probably not dual native, and it's not dual gain either.
Okay.
Isn't the GH7 is that one dual gain?
I think it might be, but I can't
I think
remember.
that's what they're doing for that dynamic boost, isn't it? They're taking it at two different gains and then combining.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So it would, so you necessarily, that would be a totally different workflow then.
Sure.
Than this.
That's a fair point.
Maybe we forgot about that.
Yeah.
Oh well, doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter. Anyways, this thing is what, like $2,500?
Yeah, I think that's right. Which, I mean, I guess we haven't really covered everything about it yet, but it's a reasonable price point in the sense that a lot of people do buy cameras in that price range.
That's like the new mid-range price point.
Yeah, it really seems that way.
I mean, this thing is competing with the A7 IV, the R6 Mark II, and the Z5. Nope. You can do it, Lucas. The S5 Mark II.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little more expensive than the S5 Mark II.
Yeah. I mean, Panasonic's just undercutting everybody.
Yeah.
But as far as the Sony and the Canon, it's basically the same price, right?
And I mean, if you're thinking about it as a hybrid camera, I think the XH2S would be a honorable mention in the category,
yeah, I mean,
even though it's APS-C.
Same price.
Yeah.
Very good hybrid camera.
Stack sensor.
Yep. Yeah, sure. We'll throw that in there as the one APS-C option in that crowd.
As we often do.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, CF Express Type B and UHS 2 SD cards.
Which I think the Z6 Mark II had those, but I think the Z6 Mark I did not have CF Express Type B, maybe.
The Z6 Mark I had one card slot.
Oh, that's the difference. Okay.
Yeah, and so you're now having the two.
Yeah.
They had two in the previous version, but if you're like my dad coming from the Z6, coming to two cards is really nice, and getting SD back as an option is really nice.
I think that's great because sometimes I love CF Express and I use it whenever I can, but sometimes it's just easier to use an SD card for whatever reason. So.
For sure. And having dual cards, even for like if this is your travel camera or you're not a professional photographer, but maybe you sell a few things online and you're just really into photography as a hobby, dual card slots is a pretty nice upgrade. I very much prefer having two card slots.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, if you don't want to use it, it doesn't cost you anything, but it's nice to have sometimes.
Yeah, and this one will obviously let you do like most of the things you can do with two cards, like record duplicates, do RAWs to one, JPEGs to the other, like maybe throw your JPEGs on the UHS 2 because you don't need the read speed of the CF Express, but maybe use that for the RAW. It doesn't let you do the dual video recording, like some of the cameras we've seen let you record like a proxy and then a RAW to the SD. That was a GH7 feature, or was that
I think that has it, but I think the S5 Mark II also got it in a firmware update recently.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a pretty cool feature. And just jumping into it, this camera can shoot internal RAW.
Yeah, that's a pretty big feature.
Yeah, it's kind of the here's one of the big flags for this one. Coming in right behind the GH7. Now we have two mirrorless bodies that can shoot RAW internal.
And it's not open gate like you said, which is a little strange.
Yeah, but it would also be nice if you're shooting RAW internal. Let's shoot H.265. Let's shoot proxies to the SD card.
Yeah, I would definitely like to have that. Because the problem with RAW is the workflow.
Yep. I think this one even does like a camera to cloud solution, which is kind of interesting.
I'm pretty sure it does.
Like, it does camera to cloud, but it does Dropbox and Google Photos.
Oh, weird.
Which is, I mean, that's kind of cool.
It's pretty good. I think that something we've talked about a few times is, I think a reason people are less into regular cameras now is just because how hard is it to take a picture and then post it on your social media?
Right.
It's harder than it should be. And so, I mean, it just kind of, if I take a picture of my phone, it instantly syncs to whatever service I'm using, and it just seems like a natural feature for cameras. And I know you can do it with stuff like the Fuji X app, and all these camera manufacturers have apps that can do it, but I don't want to have to like pair my camera to the phone and, hope that's all synced and working properly. Like the camera should just be able to do it. So that's cool.
Right. I mean, I guess like if you tethered your camera to your phone while you were out and about, it would be cool to have it just send those pictures to like your Google Photos or your Dropbox.
Yeah.
Though,
neat feature.
Yeah. I feel like maybe I should try that sometime where I'm going to like go take pictures, shoot only JPEG, and have the Fuji app automatically transfer the photos as I take them and see if they back up.
It'd be fun to try at least.
I'm like chewing to all my data.
Yeah.
All my unlimited data. Anyways, cool feature.
Yeah.
But you're not uploading your proxies to Dropbox while you're shooting RAW. So not cool feature.
Yeah. Yeah. For video, it does hurt the usefulness a little bit.
Sure. So as far as internal RAW recording, we haven't talked too much about the modes, but you get a few different things, right? You can shoot H.265, you can shoot NRAW, and you can shoot ProRes 422 and ProRes RAW.
Mm-hmm.
And these all are going to have like different weird limitations. So none of them are open gate. They're all 16 by 9. I don't remember seeing if there was a DCI 4K, like a 17 by 9.
I don't think there was.
But if you're going to shoot ProRes 422 HQ, that's going to be like a 5.4K, weirdly enough. And then if you're going to shoot ProRes RAW, it's actually full 6K. And that's different than the Z8, which I think is lower than 6K full res whenever you shoot RAW.
Interesting. I wonder why that is.
I think it's probably just megapixel count.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
it's like
fair.
even though it's stacked, it's double the megapixels.
Sure, that's fair.
Yeah, and then H.265 is 5.4K.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And then NRAW is 6K. So basically, like you have to be shooting RAW to get full 6K.
I think I understand that. I mean, anytime you're shooting a codec that's not RAW, you're having to do some sort of processing or compressing on that data. And so you're going to have some kind of limitation on what you can process. So
right.
It kind of makes sense.
And I think all these are oversampled up to 60p, which is super cool.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
And then I think I wrote this down somewhere else in my notes, but you can shoot, I think it's like, you can shoot 240 frames per second in 1080p uncropped.
Wow.
And then you can shoot 120 frames per second with an a DX crop.
Mm-hmm.
And that will go up to 4K.
Wow. Those are pretty good.
Yeah, like it's fast. And these are all like sub 10 second readout.
Yeah, I mean,
millisecond.
Those are really good numbers.
Really good numbers. So like video spec wise, barring the open gate thing, which people are super obsessed with right now.
Yeah.
This does like all the things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so as far as like which RAW is better, like I think it just kind of depends upon your workflow. The ProRes is really nice for if you're doing like Final Cut. If you're going to be working in DaVinci Resolve, you basically have to shoot NRAW. I don't know how those data rates compare.
Yeah. Well, and what does Resolve natively read NRAW, or do you have to develop it?
Resolve can manage NRAW.
Okay.
But it cannot, obviously can't manage ProRes.
Yeah, which is still weird.
ProRes RAW, sorry.
It's still weird that that's the case, but it's good that at least it can do NRAW.
I think it's just like so many things do ProRes RAW. It's like they don't want to have to support it. They want to push everybody into be RAW.
I guess so. Yeah.
Which is frustrating because I want ProRes RAW support.
Yeah.
Mostly because I don't have a Blackmagic video assist.
Yeah.
And I don't want to like sell my Ninja and buy one because that sounds exhausting.
It does sound exhausting.
Because I never shoot RAW.
Yeah, I mean, your camera can shoot RAW, but you don't ever do it.
Those video files would be huge.
They would.
Yeah. Maybe when I set up that Synology, I'll just start shooting RAW.
Only RAW.
I bought that Synology. We talked about I think we talked about that last week.
I think you were theoretically thinking about buying it, but you had not actually purchased it.
I did buy it. I went with a 4-bay, and now I'm paranoid that I'm going to run out of space.
I think once you set it up, we need to have a podcast topic on that, and I want to know your experiences and onboarding to the Synology life.
Do you think I'm going to set that up before or after I develop the film?
Man, I don't know. I think you're going to set it up before, just because I know you're getting dangerously low on space.
Yeah, I think that last project is the last thing I'm going to be able to fit on my video drive.
Yeah,
that's the real problem.
Sure.
I do want to like take all of everything that's in that client folder. That's like, oh geez, what is it? I think it's like multiple terabytes, like 5 terabytes or something.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to stick that on its own drive and cold store it.
Yep, that's probably a good idea.
Get it out of there.
I think we're getting a little off topic.
What? No, we're not.
Tell me about the autofocus on this camera.
Okay, so it's all of the autofocus stuff from the Z8. And so you get most of the modes. It is not as fast as the Z8. From what people are saying, it's maybe a 20% hit compared to the Z8 as far as autofocus performance, just because you're not reading as fast off the sensor. Though it is like a night and day improvement coming from the Z6 Mark II and especially the Z6 Mark I.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
They did take the bird autofocus and they rolled it into the animal autofocus, which is maybe a bummer for some people. I know that wildlife is a big market for Nikon, and if you're like shooting animals with a camera, it's nice to be able to pick your poison.
Yeah,
And
you
if
don't want
like,
a bird coming in there and messing up your shot.
No, I'm saying
Hate when that
if you
happens.
want to shoot a bird, you don't want a squirrel getting in there.
Oh, yeah,
and just like squirreling things up.
that's true.
But if you can't pick between the two, it's kind of a bummer. But also, at least the way that I shoot, I would rather not have to change modes all the time.
Yeah, like if you're shooting both squirrels and birds,
Right.
that's going to be a very adaptable autofocus to your situation.
Yep. So for me, thumbs up on the change, but for birding photographers, thumbs down on the change.
So in general, kind of remind me, I mean, if I'm shooting video, I mean, how is this autofocus going to compare to something like, I mean, Sony almost feels like an unfair comparison, but how's it going to compare to like Panasonic, Canon? Like where does it sit?
Okay, so from what I've seen and the way the reviews are coming in and like this autofocus system, I think that you're going to see more better autofocus off this camera than something like a S5 Mark II. I think it's just going to be a little better.
I mean, that's pretty good if it's better than an S5 Mark II.
It's not going to be quite as good as a Canon, and it's not going to be quite as good as the Sony. I think particularly in photo, there is a little bit of UI lag behind the focus. It is going to hit more than the box necessarily says in some cases. But I think that one of the main issues that people have with the focus system on these Nikons is that it's not as sticky as you might want it to be.
I see.
You can go in and you can adjust like how much it sticks, basically. Like if there's something that crosses in front of what you're focusing on, do you want it to like grab focus?
Yeah.
And it seems like even if you're like eye detecting on somebody and their hands move in front of their face or a person walks in front of them and you have it set to like max stickiness, it's still not 100%. It will frequently drift or try to grab that other thing and then go back.
Okay.
So they haven't quite nailed that down to the extent that like Canon or Sony are doing it right now, but it's good. And I would say it's probably better than your Panasonics and your Fujis. And I think that most people are going to be able to get by with it. It's not going to be too much of a problem.
Yeah. Cool.
And I think that issue is kind of carried over to video. You can have problems where it may lose focus to the background and then it just never gets it back. Like it won't, even if you like walk somebody back into the frame, it can't seem to pull it back in.
You know, I mean, we've talked so many times about how Nikon just like, they're just not taken as seriously in the video world as these other companies. And part of that is that I feel like, or an effect of that, I guess, is that we never really talk much about like how is Nikon's autofocus. Like it's just not even really in the conversation. But I mean, from what you're saying, it sounds like it's not quite as sophisticated as like a Sony or a Canon, but it seems like it can hold its own in the modern market.
Yeah, it's competitive. It's just not. It's not really class leading.
Yeah,
It's like the George Russell of camera autofocus systems.
I think. I mean, you know, we both shoot Fuji. And I would say that's Fuji's autofocus too, where it's fine, but nobody's going to try and argue that it's the best.
Fuji is the Daniel Ricciardo of autofocus systems.
I'm sure all of the people that listen to this show and follow F1 will understand what you're talking about.
Oh, they're gonna love it. The two people, they're gonna love those references. Anyways, one of the big improvements that they did advertise for this thing is low light autofocus.
Oh, okay.
And they're saying that it's rated for a -10 exposure drop. And with like, if you're shooting at f1.2 and you're at like -10 EV, it can still focus.
That's pretty impressive.
And from
I don't know why you're trying to focus when you're that underexposed, but
I mean, like you're whipping out the Noct. That's a manual focus lens. That wouldn't actually work. But you're shooting in really low light, or you know, you're probably going to boost it now. Whatever. Nighttime photography.
You're shooting with a flash.
Sure, shooting with a flash. That's a really good example, Daniel. Great job. From what I've seen from the reviews thus far, still all pre-production, basically the claim holds up.
Yeah.
So pretty good low light autofocus.
Interesting.
Which I guess flash makes the most sense.
Yeah, like if you're like a wedding photographer,
yeah,
you want to lock your shot on and then.
Which the flash sync on this in mechanical shutter is like 1/200, and I thought that was a little low.
Yeah.
I usually expect that to be in the 1/250 range.
Yeah, it's a little strange. You did hit on something I was curious about, though, which is, we talked about the Lumix S9 recently, and that camera didn't even have a mechanical shutter.
Right.
And I know this is a pretty fast sensor, and I also know that the Z8 and Z9 don't have a mechanical shutter, right? They're
Right.
those electronic
That is
only.
correct.
But this camera does have a mechanical shutter.
It does. And it's not like electronic first curtain shutter. It's a full mechanical shutter.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about that? You think that's better?
I think that if you're not going to go full stacked, you got to have a mechanical shutter.
Yeah.
And I support the decision to do this. They're bringing a lot of the electronic shutter features to this. I mentioned flash sync roughly 28 seconds ago.
Mm-hmm.
And you can flash sync shoot an electronic shutter with this. And it'll do 1/60.
Huh.
And it has some of that LED sync feature where you can like set the LED syncs and shoot an electronic shutter and so mostly avoid some of like the line skipping.
Yeah, yeah.
And so if you're going to shoot, so like burst rates on this thing are insane. If you're going to shoot, you can shoot what is it, like 120 frames per second JPEG only in electronic shutter. It's like super nuts. I think mechanical goes up to maybe 12. I wrote it down somewhere. I'm probably going to repeat this whenever we get to that part of my notes. But it has crazy fast like burst shooting.
Yeah.
And electronic shutter is always going to be faster for your burst shooting modes.
Mm-hmm.
And so they are bringing a lot of those features that we saw out of the Z9 and the Z8 that are ES only. But I think that because you are partially stacked, even though it's like 9 millisecond readout, it's good to have a mechanical shutter to fall back on.
Yeah, I mean, in general, it's like I understand the value of electronic only on the Z8 and Z9, fewer moving parts, etc. But I mean, it's nice to have the fallback of having it, and I mean, it's just a tried and true technology. So I think it makes sense for this camera, especially because it's not a fully stacked sensor.
Definitely. Oh, it was actually in this part of the notes that you were guiding me into right here. It's 60 frames per second, JPEG only, no crop.
Interesting. Okay.
Flash up to 160 sync, 1/200 mechanical. We mentioned that.
And so that 120 frame per second is cropped.
That's right. It's cropped in. So it's an 11 megapixel crop and it's 120 frames per second.
Kind of cool for like sports or something, if you're filming your kid's soccer game, because you crop in, get a more punched in image and get faster capture.
This reminds me, we were talking about the Lumix S9 and it has that zoom feature where it does the whole digital zoom on top of your regular zoom.
Yeah.
And in that episode, I was like, it goes from like 24 to 12 megapixels. And that's not true.
It's not true. Then what is true?
Well, like, do you remember that whole conversation when I was trying to justify whether or not I should buy an X-T5? And I was saying that like, if you go from 6 megapixels and you like double the width and the height, that's 6 to 24, and you do it again, it's like, it's not 48, it's like 100 or something.
Now that you mention it, I do remember that.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure that I should have said 6 megapixels for that instead of 24, which is pretty different.
Yeah, 6 megapixels is pretty low.
I mean, I don't know if that's actually the truth, but it is a 2x.
Yeah.
And if you're going to crop in 2x, I mean, are we
So
talking
that means
2x of the diagonal?
Mm-hmm,
Or are we talking 2x of the vertical and the horizontal? Because that's different too.
Yeah. I mean, this 11 megapixels is, it's a little less than half of 24.5. So that's not a 2x.
It must be some sort of percentage of the diagonal, not the length and the width of the sensor. Let me pull out my notebook and do some Pythagorean. If I had the new...
you had the iPad calculator app.
If I had the iPad calculator app right now, Daniel, so help me. I'd be doing freaking triangle math on that thing.
You would. Yep.
Every day. Every day it comes up. I'm like, boy, sure wish I could just whip out my pencil and do some iPad calculator math.
As soon as that public beta comes out, we'll be able to come back and answer this question.
Oh my gosh. Like, you have no idea, Daniel. I'm going to be calculating so many things. It's going to be out of control. I'm going to be doing like proportional math, but I don't have to actually do the proportional math. I can just put in the symbols. Oh my gosh. It's going to be life changing.
You'll be even more of an iPad power user.
I'm so pumped about it. You have no idea. Anyway.
Poor Nikon people.
We're just all over the place. Okay, cool. So I'm on board with mechanical shutter. It's 20 frames per second if you want RAW plus JPEG. And that's electronic shutter. And I think it's like 14 if it's mechanical. So those are the limits there.
Pretty good.
I think that the electronic shutter goes up to 1/16,000th of a second, which is like, okay. I think that's basically the max for most electronic shutters right now, except for maybe like, the Z8 is probably about similar. I don't actually know what the Z8 goes up to. It probably goes up to 1/32, right? Daniel, why don't you know the max shutter speed of the Z8 off your hand?
Never needed to shoot at shutter speeds this fast.
What if you wanted to like capture like something going into water?
I mean, that'd be a good reason for it, but I've never done that.
Yeah, okay, whatever. I wish there was more info on how this thing performed in some of the photo modes.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem there is that, you know, a lot of the most compelling reviews are videos. I mean, both in terms of what you can learn about the camera, but also just, I mean, you know, we like watching YouTube videos, and those people don't really talk about the photo performance of cameras like this very much.
Some of them do. I did watch a few that were very photo focused, but it seems like, you know, without the raw files being
I guess that is
mostly accessible, like we can't really see how much they can push.
That's fair.
I don't know if we mentioned it, but this has the exact same processor as the Z8 and the Z9, which means it's a 3-year-old processor at this point.
But maybe it's encouraging for things like firmware updates.
Definitely. Yeah, it's good that they build on the same platform.
Yeah.
I've heard some rumblings that there isn't going to be a Z7 Mark III.
Oh, interesting. Like, what? Why wouldn't they do that?
So they've been releasing the Z6 and the Z7 along with each other every time.
Okay.
The Mark 1s and the Mark 2s.
Mm-hmm.
I think that maybe there's just not room for it in the lineup. Like, I don't know what it would be. Maybe it would be partially stacked so they could save some money.
Yeah.
Well, the Z8's what, like $3,200 right now?
Is it? Is it on sale? I mean, even if it's not, it is kind of, I mean, when you think about the specs of this camera versus the specs of the Z8, it does feel like a pretty natural, like just make the jump up. You don't have to necessarily have a camera at every price point.
Yeah, the Z8 is $3,500 right now.
Okay.
So it's just
$1,000.
$1,000 more.
Yeah.
Where would you stick the Z7?
Yeah, I mean, you know, like I guess you could go halfway at 3,000, but what are they really going to provide for that extra $500? The decision makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that basically supplanted. Though now it's weird that they have this 7 out there, and now there's a gap in the lineup, gap in the numbers.
Yeah.
We haven't seen a Z5 in a really long time either.
Yeah, we kind of forget that camera exists.
Yeah, that was like their RP competitor.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be cool to see a Z5 again.
Yeah. Maybe it'll happen.
I still like the Z8 a whole lot. Like, I wish I shot with a Z8.
What else do we have in this camera? The EVF seems pretty interesting. Seems like it gets very bright.
Oh my gosh, we have to talk about that, Daniel. I'm like reloading my Google Docs so I can look at my notes. And I don't know if you have this problem, but sometimes when I alt tab between Safari and Docs just goes out of RAM.
Yeah.
And then it has to like reload.
Well, I think part of the problem is that the show notes for our podcast are up to like 100 episodes in one Google Doc.
Oh, we need to what's it called? Like, whenever you split a code base, fork it. We need to fork the show notes.
I think so. This is a real problem.
Okay. Well, we're almost at episode 100, so let's fork at episode 100.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
Let me know when that iPad loads. Maybe next time.
Oh, it has.
Maybe next time you should get one more RAM. You know?
You have to get the 1 terabyte version to get more RAM now.
You do. Yeah.
They just are really making those things expensive.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand. Okay, 5.8 million dots. That's pretty good. That's it's not like 9 million dots that you get in like the what is that, the Z9 Mark III and like the A1? Is A1 9 million?
It's pretty high.
Those like the really high end Sonys have like 9 million dots. It does 120 frames per second. Great. Mm-hmm. That's like table stakes for these mid range to high end cameras. Love it. It does full HDR. It's OLED. We're still talking about the EVF, Daniel. 4,000 nits.
Is that too bright?
I don't. It would like burn your eyeballs out because it's not like you're outside and you're competing with the sun.
Yeah, you're sticking your eye up to that thing
in a dark and closed environment. 4,000 nits.
It just seems like way too much.
I mean, I get it's HDR, and so like that's like probably peak brightness in certain areas. Crazy.
I mean,
crazy bright.
I feel like you're gonna look at the world through that EVF, and then when you take the camera away from your face, reality is going to be disappointing. Like it's not going to be as vivid.
It just feels like it would literally be brighter than the sun. I didn't go and look to see how bright other cameras make their EVFs. I don't think we normally list that as a spec.
Yeah. I
But
guess it's not normally notable.
it feels like that's brighter than basically
Yeah.
any camera right now.
It's crazy bright.
Yeah, it's a little absurd. And I super love it. And I want everyone to start advertising the nits of their EVF as like a competition.
First question we should ask about a new camera. How many nits?
How many nits is your EVF? That's a very jargony statement.
Yeah, sure is.
Point is, the EVF on this thing is fantastic.
Yeah.
It's like super duper good.
Yeah, which is, it's very important for photo, can be important for video, depending on what you're doing.
Definitely. And then the back screen, I don't know if I listed the resolution, but it's like competitive. It's like whatever 3 million or something. Probably like the same as the Z.
The biggest thing about it, though, is that now it's a fully articulating screen, right?
Yeah, and as a recently declared member of Team Tilty Screen,
You unhappy about that?
not loving it.
Yeah. I mean, I when I think about Nikon, I still think about photo first. And so I don't know about the full flippy screen, because I do think for photos, for anything where you're primarily behind the camera, I think the tilt screen is better. And I don't know. I think that maybe it would have been better to have on this camera. So
It's the right choice, in my opinion, for a hybrid photo video
I
camera.
think so.
I can't imagine my father with a flippy screen.
What if he gets super into vlogging? Can you imagine?
He's going to hate it.
Can you imagine him vlogging?
This reminds me that I was reading the latest Fujifilm firmware update.
Which was not.
It's like 6.01.
Which is not Reala Ace for
No.
the X6
No, it's not. It came out like June 12th or something.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that they said that they fixed is that whenever you're shooting selfies, sometimes the autofocus goes the wrong way when it's actually going the other way. Like you pan right,
Yeah.
and the green box pans left, even though it's tracking you.
Interesting.
And I was wondering how often that's coming up for the XH2S. A lot of people shooting selfies, having a real problem there.
Yeah. That's a little weird.
Anyways, that's gonna be my dad. He's gonna be shooting selfies with his Z6.
Yep.
Maybe he'll find out that that's the bee's knees, and it's the thing that he's been missing this whole time.
It could be.
Him and my mom are gonna go out. They're gonna go to, I don't know, Germany or something silly, and he's just gonna flip that puppy around. Selfie.
I'm telling you, man, he might start a vlog channel. Can you imagine your dad vlogging?
I don't want to tell him how to edit videos. I don't want to have to explain to him.
No editing. Just
gonna straight upload it.
Yeah. Straight from the camera to YouTube, camera cloud, camera to YouTube. Perfect.
I found a YouTuber yesterday that is this old cowboy guy. I swear he's like in his 60s, gray hair.
Yeah, ancient in his 60s.
His channel is sponsored by Ariat. Like he's just straight up cowboy, but he teaches you how to cook on a ranch.
Oh man!
I watched his video about how to make 2-ingredient biscuits.
I bet those biscuits are good.
They looked fantastic. But oh boy, he's like yeehaw. He didn't say yeehaw, but he definitely talked like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, he looks older than my dad.
Not a lot of video editing going on that channel.
He has like 3 million subscribers.
What?
Dude, it's legit.
Wow.
But that could be my dad.
Yeah, sure could.
Yeah, so for all your Nikon content, now that he's gonna have a flippy screen, we'll start posting his channel in the show notes.
Yep. Nikon has unlocked all of his capabilities.
Yep. Jeez. Anyways, I think he's gonna hate it. I don't think he's gonna break it, but he's totally gonna snap that thing off.
It's just kind of annoying. I mean, if you are trying to take a low angle shot or something, having to flip the screen out, tilt it, the only thing I prefer about it for photos is being able to close it on the camera, like screen in, because I like that protection. But otherwise, yeah, it's just not as good.
Maybe he doesn't ever use the back screen, and he's just an EVF guy.
No, he could be.
Which makes me think that this is going to be a huge boon for him.
Oh man, 4,000 nits.
So sometimes he misses focus. Your eyes kind of glasses and that sort of thing. You got to adjust a diopter. And I feel like the improved autofocus is going to help a lot.
Yeah.
And the fact that this thing can just burn those images right into his retina.
Yeah.
I mean, he's never going to miss focus again.
Yeah. Probably right.
Yeah.
He'll also see all those photos when he closes his eyes at night. He'll get burning on his eyeballs.
Yep. That's a real risk here.
Yep.
Burning on your eyeballs. Anyway.
What else you got?
I found the part of the show notes where I talked about more of the video features, but I think I successfully recanted all of this, except for the fact that 1080 240 is not 100% full width. It's 95% of the sensor area. So sorry about lying to everybody.
Yeah.
You can shoot in N-Log, which is one of the things that Gerald complained about, was that it does feel like N-Log is kind of limited on its dynamic range for some of the newer profiles in this thing, and it felt to him like they may want to start considering an N-Log too.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what happens as sensors change over time. You know, like you need to change the profile to make it,
right,
you know, to maximize it.
So, yeah, you're kind of like forcing it in there.
Yeah.
You know, on the last video that we shot, I accidentally did the XT3 stuff as an F-Log2 conversion instead of an F-Log1 conversion because I used the LUTs.
I bet it worked fine,
and
didn't it?
It looked different, and I had to do a little more work to match it. And then after I realized that, I was like, ugh, I did all that work to match it, and it already looks matchy-matchy. And whenever I switched to the F-Log1, the colors are slightly different. Like they're more magenta versus green. And boy, I just don't want to deal with that. And so I left it. And I shipped the video.
I thought it looked fine.
And no one knows the difference.
Yep.
When is the Resolve 19 coming out?
I don't know. Later this year would be my guess.
August.
Yeah. Yeah, with that Fuji firmware update.
Anyway, this camera does the pre-buffer release thing, which I love that feature.
Oh, yeah, where you that's where it's basically always taking pictures. When you press the button, it saves those pictures.
Mm-hmm. When you half press the shutter, it's always buffering, and then when you push the shutter down, it saves the last X seconds of photos.
Yeah, that's a good feature for sure.
It only does it in JPEG. Why?
Gotta be a processing
like
issue.
Every other camera I know of does RAW too. Your camera does RAW.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, it's a shame, but
a little bit of a shame, but I guess it's better than nothing.
Mm-hmm.
What I want to know is if you set the pre-buffer on and you're half holding the shutter, can you get the JPEGs for like the 1 second before and then get RAW after that?
That'd be cool.
Like, can it drop into RAW for the actual photos and like you have a little bit of backup, but I mean, I don't know.
That'd be a good compromise though.
I don't know if anyone's tested that.
Yeah.
It would be a good compromise.
Yeah. It's a good idea. Write that down, Nikon.
Yeah.
Put that in a firmware update if you don't already have it.
Come on. Or just add RAW to this.
Yeah. Yeah. Or just do that.
Cut the pre-buffer in half and give us some RAW. It's probably a RAM thing. Anyway, we talked about the camera to cloud stuff. They added Nikon image JPEG custom profiles.
That sounds like film simulations.
It does.
And Lumix Lab LUTs.
It really does.
Everyone's trying to jump on this train.
They got to get in it, man. Everyone's trying to compete with that Fuji.
We actually had somebody email us recently saying that they figured out how to do something similar on a Canon camera.
Oh, I was going to dig into that, and we were definitely going to talk about it on the show.
Yeah, so
that's
kind of an
super interesting to me.
Kind of an interesting trend that all these all these cameras are kind of adding that feature. They're seeing all the success of the X100 series and wanting to get in on that.
That camera. That Canon one, apparently, like people have been doing this picture profile thing on Canons for like what is it? The Z? Geez, I lost all train of thought. 70,
okay,
like the 70 Mark II. They've been doing there's like 3 custom profiles, and people have been doing I made a Porta 400 version of a simulation.
Well, Lucas, you have a Canon 7D.
I know, which is why I was going to watch those videos and set this up and do some test shots. And I was going to talk about it on the show. But now that we're talking about it on the show, now I have to do it.
Yep.
And now it feels like homework, so I'm never going to do it. It's a real bummer.
The people are going to hold you to it.
Yeah, they're going to revolt in the streets. Anyway, I don't have anything more about it. Like, it was just kind of an aside.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't seem like there's going to be an app.
It's not quite as it's not like the Fujifilm simulations where it's a major selling point of the camera, and it's not like the Lumix thing where they're like, here's this community around it. It's just an extra little feature.
Yeah, like here's some custom profiles that you can set up for your JPEGs.
Yeah, well, that's cool.
I think most people are just going to shoot in RAW.
Yeah, probably so.
And then use their Lightroom presets.
Mm-hmm.
Which, if you want to, you can go now to the show notes and you can buy my Lightroom presets.
But you don't have any Lightroom presets, Lucas.
Oh. They're just going to be Fujifilm simulations.
Now you're gonna have to pick between setting up the Synology, developing the film, and creating Lightroom presets.
I'm not creating Lightroom presets.
Fine.
Everyone would hate them.
All right, that's enough. It's enough derails for
what you want to finish this episode.
Yes.
Dang it, Daniel.
Yes. The people want to know what we think.
We have so much to get through. We talked about the IBIS, right? No, we didn't. Yes, we did. We talked about the pixel shift thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got IBIS. It's like 8 stops,
which is pretty high.
One of the key features for the Nikon in-body stabilization system is that it will it'll move the sensor focus plane, whatever, the stabilization plane around the focus point. And so whereas like most use the center of the sensor as the axis for rotation to stabilize, it will use wherever you're focusing. So if you have your focus point like the top right corner, it's going to try to shift around an axis at that focus point.
That's pretty cool. It's neat that they can do that. It makes sense. I do feel like you probably can't get as good a performance on the edges as you can in the center.
I would expect not as well, but it does seem that for people who use this system, there is a noticeable difference because of that, with the way that it stabilizes.
Like, I guess it's a trade-off where it's like, yeah, like it just can't move the sensor as much around a point on the edge, but maybe that's offset by what little movement it does is more effective for that type of shot.
Right. It is still not like Panasonic level good.
Yeah.
But it does seem that this is probably better than like Sony.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as good as your handheld boost stuff. Like most cameras have a boost mode where you can like lock on.
Yeah.
The lock on mode for the Nikon Z6III just seems like it's not great. Like you're always going to see like a little bit of movement. It doesn't seem to be able to do like rock solid still.
Mm-hmm.
But the handheld stuff where you are getting some movement is fairly decent. It's not too jerky. Like I said, it seems like it's not as good as like Panasonic.
Yeah.
But similar to the autofocus, not best in class, but it's gonna be good enough for most people.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay. Let's talk about the build of this thing.
Yeah.
It's basically a Z6 Mark II.
Mm-hmm. Which is, I mean, like to contextualize it, it's like a standard sized mirrorless camera, right? Like it's not especially portable, but it's also not huge and bulky. Like it, some cameras have like an integrated battery grip. It's nothing like that. It's just a normal sized camera.
Doesn't have a fan, camera size camera. I'm going to blast through these body specs because I'm sure we're at like 3 hours. It's got a PSAM. It's got 3 custom modes, and it has a full auto on its mode dial.
Pretty standard.
Does everyone always have a full auto on the mode dial?
I feel like it's pretty common.
I feel like we don't shoot in full auto enough.
I'm pretty happy with
I think people
that.
should go out there and just shoot some full auto. I mean, you should just like let go, let God.
I don't know about that. Disagree.
It's got a hot shoe. Doesn't have a data shoe.
Okay.
We've been seeing that from Panasonic. We've been seeing that from Sony.
Mm-hmm.
Those are really cool. We like those Micron features. Not getting that here. Just a hot shoe.
Shame.
Throw your flash on there, get some TTL sync, and that's about it.
Mm-hmm.
They do have like that e-ink style screen on top. I love seeing that in cameras.
Yeah, be able to just glance down and see your settings.
Yep, and then have it on whenever the camera's off, kind of thing. It's got a little light button. It's got front and back wheel, so you can set all your
sure
whatever buttons. It's Nikon's typical. It's like basically the typical Nikon layout, right? Like it's got the ISO button, it's got the 2 wheels, that sort of thing. We're looking at dangly eyelets. They don't have the built-in eyelets for your strap.
Yeah, which is that's not good. I'd rather have the built-in stuff.
Yeah, I really like it built in. I think that's different than the Z. Do you remember when the Z8 came out and they had that whole issue with the recalls?
Yeah, and like the lug was falling out or
right,
something.
like it wasn't secured for some models, and so it was like ripping out of the camera.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe watch out for that whenever you get this.
Yeah. Maybe don't be the first one to let it hang.
Yeah, you want to be doing drop tests with the strap.
Yep.
Now I'm surprised that didn't make it into like every camera review from then out. It's like you put the strap on like a C stand, you just drop the camera, see if it holds.
It's pretty bold.
We need more camera durability tests like that
apparently
on YouTube.
Yeah. Maybe Gerald can start doing that one.
Sure, why not? It's got a dedicated record button in addition to the shutter button. Power switches around the shutter. Still has an AF joystick on this one, so that didn't go away even with the lower price. It's got an AE lock. I didn't see an autofocus lock for the back button, or vice versa. I didn't see an AE lock, but there's an AF lock. So you can do back button autofocus. Doesn't seem like there's a back button exposure, but I'm pretty sure you can set it to a custom button.
Yeah.
Which, speaking of, the Z6, similar to the Z6 Mark II, has 2 custom buttons in the front. Right, so like if you're holding the camera, your middle finger and your ring finger on your right hand can reach around to where the lens is, and there's two
That's
buttons.
Cool. I mean, I always like having more buttons. It's more flexibility.
I like the finger buttons on the front by the lens. The XH2S has 1.
Yeah,
I think 2 would be even better.
Yeah, I mean it's in a sufficiently different spot that it's a little bit easier to remember what you've set that button to.
Yep, and then having not a billion of them, but just 2. So it's like up or down. That's great.
Yeah.
It has a video still switch. So video mode, still mode.
That seems like it's more and more common now.
Yeah, for sure. How do you feel about that? Do you prefer having a switch that goes straight to video, or would you rather have like a bunch of custom modes where one's set to video, one's set to photo?
I don't know. I mean, the custom modes are nice, but I do like having the switch. And it's rare that I'm going to be wanting to use custom modes to switch between a photo and a video. And so it's almost like I'd rather have that switch, but then also have custom modes. And it's like that way I can have, 3 video custom modes and 3 photo custom modes. Because every now and then, like on the XH2S where it doesn't have that switch, every now and then I'm setting up a custom mode and I'm like, oh yeah, it's still in photo mode. I need to switch it to video mode for this custom mode. And it's a little annoying.
Gone back and reset up my custom modes. I have 4 that are set to video, 3 that are set to photo, and then I have my PSAM photo stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's a video one. I like strongly prefer that. I thought that I would have wanted like a video switch. So it's like I'm in video mode and then my C1 through C3 or whatever my video modes are going to be, and then I flip to photo and then it's photo.
Yeah.
And like you are contextually switching. But I really like having it the way that it is on the XH2S. I like having just give me as many custom modes as I can. I'll set some to video and some to photo. And then it's one switch to flip directly to where I need to be. And it's not like switch to video, then switch to C2.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, so this is like the latter, not the former.
Right.
I don't think I said those in any order, but let's just go with that.
Yeah. This one has a switch.
Full-size HDMI port.
Nice to see.
It's got a headphone jack. It's got a mic port that supports line in.
Oh, nice.
Apparently they didn't have that before.
Okay.
And so if you were feeding it a hot signal that wasn't like from a Zoom, that wasn't like a headphone signal or just a regular mic signal.
Yeah.
It was too hot. So now you can switch between line in and mic in. That's really cool. And then it's got one USB-C. The Z8 had 2 USB-Cs. And so smaller camera, they dropped the second USB-C port.
That's fair.
Fine. And then we already talked about the card slots. And then it has the standard Nikon remote shutter input.
Yeah. No big surprises and all that.
Yeah, nothing too crazy. It's kind of just like everything you would normally expect out of this camera. There's nothing blatantly missing. And I think it's good.
Yeah.
It looks like it's using the same, whatever, ENAL 15C battery that we're seeing in most of those Nikon cameras.
Well, is that the same that they used in the last revision?
I don't know if it's the same as the Z6 Mark II. I'm pretty sure it is, but I think it's the same as like the Z8. It's just kind of like, it's that older Nikon battery. They haven't upgraded or anything, but like it's basically fine.
Cool.
So yeah, I mean, that's it. Like, is this now the go-to Nikon camera for everybody?
I mean, it seems pretty solid to me. The price is fairly high. I mean, at $2,500, it's you've got to be pretty sure about the purchase. But I mean, it sounds like the sensor is solid. We've got a little bit of concern on the dynamic range, but I mean, ignoring that, it seems like it's got really good video specs. Otherwise, as far as the resolutions and frame rates, internal RAW, all that stuff. I don't think Nikon has to worry about the photo side. I think they have a good reputation on that side. And I don't think there's anything to worry about there. I think it's a pretty good camera.
I like that they have the ZF and the ZFC for kind of like the lower-ish end market. The Z50 and the Z5 have gotten pretty long in the tooth. And it felt like Nikon wasn't doing anything for a long time. And then they came out with those ZF cameras, the Z9 and the Z8. And it was like, oh man, Nikon's cool now again, somehow.
Nikon's cool now.
It's not your daddy's camera in most cases. And I think that for a lot of these camera companies, that $2,000 to $3,000 mid-range 24-ish megapixel camera is the one that sells.
Yeah, I think so too.
And they needed this camera.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, this isn't the flagship camera, but I think this is the camera that sells. And now that we have such a compelling camera from Nikon finally new and in that slot and extremely competitive with everything else that's in that range, I think this is the Nikon camera for most people.
Yeah.
I do think that 24 megapixels is maybe shy for some. Like, maybe people may lean towards the A7 IV because they want better autofocus and more megapixels. But 24 is probably going to be good enough for most people. And I think this is just like a really compelling camera.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, as a video shooter, I think the partially stacked sensor is a pretty exciting feature. You know, so is internal RAW. You know, it sounds like their autofocus is pretty good. And I think Nikon has a great selection of lenses. So I think there is even on the video side, I think there's a lot to like about it. I mean, compared to like the R6 Mark II, this is more exciting to me. I feel like it's, you know, it's sufficiently more modern for how much newer it is. And, I mean, at least until newer cameras come out from these other brands, it's a pretty competitive, camera within that range.
Yeah. I think the R6 Mark II is the R6 Mark II and the XH2S are the only two cameras beyond the Z6III in this range that could shoot like 4K 60 with no crop.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's now like there's a third one that can do it. And so now we're looking at the S5 II and the A7 IV that are maybe more limited on their video features, which is weird to say about the S5 II.
It is, because I was going to say, I think if I was primarily video, I feel like I would pick the S5 II over this, but I don't know if I can really defend that decision other than that Panasonic is just so video oriented.
Yeah, it kind of probably depends upon your workflow. If you really want some of those like dual recording features, or you need like the like LUT profile stuff that you can customize, or a lot of like the waveforms and like all those sort of things, then yeah, like the S5 makes a lot of sense and it's great for video. But the Z6 III having raw internal, you're sacrificing some on the dynamic range. I think that it's still pretty compelling and you're not losing too much. I would tend to agree though, if you're like 50-50 photo video, the Z6 Mark III is probably going to be the better buy.
I think so.
But if you're like anything more than that, if you're 55-45, then maybe leaning towards the S5 Mark II probably makes more sense.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
But those are like the newer cameras in this range. Like the R6 Mark II and the XH2S came out in 2022, and the A7 IV came out in 2021.
Yeah.
So those are kind of getting long. I don't think we're going to see any updates to the Sony or the Canon this year for those lines. I think it's going to be next year. But
and I mean, Fuji's not going to update the XH2S for
it's been basically
minimum another year,
3 or 4 years on those cycles. I could see an XH2S maybe or XH3S maybe next year, but I seriously doubt it.
Yeah, that feels pushing it to me too.
Yeah, it feels like it's pushing it. So I think that the R6 II still pretty much competes with what Nikon's doing, but it's going to be slower on the rolling shutter, maybe a little better on the autofocus. I think the IBIS isn't going to be quite as good. You're going to have a worse viewfinder. You do get Canon colors, and the battery is maybe not going to be, the battery will probably be comparable, but the R6 II still had some overheating concerns, if I remember correctly.
I think you're right.
So it is kind of an interesting comparison. I think that maybe not too many people are trying to decide between Nikon and Canon, even though that used to be like the way things were. You're basically just going to like buy into your lens ecosystem.
Sure.
But I think this is like a really compelling camera. And if you're shopping in that $2,500 price point, or you're looking to switch systems, it's like hard not to give a good long, hard look at that Nikon Z6III.
I mean, I'm glad to see it. I think Nikon's doing good stuff, and this is a very competitive release, which is always encouraging to see, you know, because these other companies are going to have to try and beat it, and that's good for us.
I just never thought we were going to get here. I mean, we are, what is this, episode 91 of this podcast? And we're like 85 episodes ago, Nikon was the butt of basically every joke.
Yeah.
And
now we're like, this is legitimately a really good camera.
Yeah, it's like, oh, well, Nikon now has a bunch of really good cameras at every price point, mostly if you're shopping above $1,500. And yeah, okay, cool. Gotta start making fun of Olympus now, I guess.
That's it for the show today. Thanks for joining us. And if you liked it, tell a friend so they can check it out too. You can find out more about the show at www.cameragearpodcast.com, and you can find us on Twitter at CameraGearPod. We'll be back with more next week.